I will be concluding with a couple of prayers as well, but I want to now cede the microphone to my dear friend Mark Stoller. Mark, would you like to stand or would you like to sit?
Let me try standing.
Okay, Mark is suffering from a pinched nerve in his back, so I'm taking care of him. So if it starts to hurt, I'll get you a chair, okay? Okay.
Pinched nerve will act as a blessing because since I can only stand for a few minutes at a time, it keeps brief what I'm going to say. Okay. Rabbi Mimi Wall had 3 daughters, all of whom are here today, but they also had at least 3 adopted sons. I was blessed to be one of them. Another one is sitting next to me, Nevin. And as one of them, I have been asked to speak for a few minutes, and I say a few, about Rabbi Wall and what it was like to be one of his adopted sons. It began in 1974. When I first met him, we immediately got into an argument, and we soon realized we would be arguing for the rest of our lives in a loving way. I was at the height of my 1960s rebelliousness and immediately challenged him on a historical analogy he had used. I was the professional historian. You can't do that. He smiled. Then the next time I challenged him on my Jewish heritage, asking why I should be bound by an accident of birth, he responded calmly, "But there are no accidents." Thus began our dialogue, a dialogue that grew and blossomed over the years. Perhaps that was due at least partially to the fact that I had, in my youth, thought of becoming a rabbi instead of a history professor, whereas he had thought of becoming a history teacher. I think we both, each of us, made the right choice. And history as well as Judaism were topics we never tired of talking about. We also never tired of talking about sports, since we were both New York Yankees and New York football Giants fans. Mayor Wall loved watching sports, and he loved history, most notably Civil War history, military history in general, which was one of the things that I taught. So he audited my military history courses, my diplomatic history courses at UVM. And as he became one of my teachers, so I became, in a way, one of his. Unlike many of my other students, though, Rabbi Wall actually read and thought about the assigned works. And he challenged me in class with his eclectic mind in ways I'd never been challenged before in class. Sometimes it drove me crazy. Similarly, I often attended the courses that he offered, read the books that he assigned or recommended. Franz Werfel's Hearken Unto the Voice, Milton Steinberg's As a Driven Leaf, for example. And we argued over interpretations and what they might mean, and it went on and on. He also taught me a few things about how to teach. Perhaps most importantly, as he once told me at final exam and grading time, quote, "the need to temper justice with mercy," unquote. That is a lesson I tried to repeat to myself whenever I assigned grades, and one that speaks volumes about this man as a teacher and as a human being. But as I think most of you know, but some of you may be too young to know, Rabbi Wall made history as well as studying and teaching it. He attended Jewish Theological Seminary when some of the most notable scholars and teachers were there: Kaplan, Finkelstein, Heschel. He then enlisted during World War II in the U.S. Army and served as a chaplain with the 9th Division in Europe. He helped to liberate camps, and he then stayed in Europe after the war to work with the Jewish DPs. And did he get into trouble for that? But that is another story for another time. He came to Burlington then, and in his 40-plus years of service here, he was responsible for the enormous growth of this congregation and its movement physically to this building in the early 1950s, but more importantly, religiously, spiritually, socially. to conservative Judaism, to its present inclusiveness as a congregation, and to its full acceptance within the larger Burlington and Vermont communities. He was a pioneer in this regard in the ecumenical movement that flourished in the post-war years, a fact illustrated but by no means limited to the fact that he was the first Jew to teach at St. Michael, first rabbi actually, to teach at St. Michael's College. World War II really, I won't say created the ecumenical movement, but it was a direct outgrowth of the American experience in that war. It forced Americans to deal with their own racism as they liberated the survivors of other racism. It also introduced different and racial religious groups to each other. Mayer once told me of the night during the war when two white Southern soldiers from Georgia came to visit him in his tent. Why? Because they'd never seen a Jew before. As they left, one turned to the other and said, quote, "See, I told you he didn't have horns." We read that section today. But to limit myself to Mayor Wall's love of history and making history is to miss his essence, his unique and extraordinary ability to reach into one's innermost heart and soul, often with a simple, profound comment that would cut to the core of your existence and what was troubling you, and thereby comfort you and simultaneously teach you. Many examples, but my back is getting tired, so I will skip those. But I will conclude really with Mayor Wall's abilities and the fact that they were directly related to his extraordinary ability to love. He loved humanity as a whole and each person as an individual. You could feel his love for you. It infused everything he said and did with you, and you gave him your love in return. For me, that love was most evident in the way he welcomed me into his family and, quote, adopted me as a son. As he became a surrogate father, Mimi a surrogate mother, mine had died when I was still a teenager, his daughters in turn became my siblings. Shira once said, more than once said, to Mindy, me, and my wife Diane, we are like brothers and sisters together. And as such, we shared numerous joys and sorrows. That was never more the case than when Mindy and Shira each lost a child, and years later, I lost my beloved wife. I don't know how I could have survived without the two of you, or Rabbi Amy. So today, we rededicate this inclusive house of worship that he built and led for so many years. It is fitting, beyond words, that this sanctuary continues to be named after him and after his wife, Mimi.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. During the course of this day, we have not only Mark's beautiful dedication, the opportunity to hear from Rabbi Wall's daughters, who I invite to come stand with me now. And then at lunchtime, Jeff Potash is going to offer more comments because there's so much to say that is important. But for right now, careful with it. Okay, I want you to trip on that. Sorry. Okay, I'll be the house, I'm trying to be the house mom. Okay. Shira and Mindy and Naomi, we are blessed by your presence, and we are blessed by what your family has contributed for all of us to enjoy. I've asked them to share brief comments. Please.
Thank you, Rabbi, and we're blessed with Rabbi Amy, who from the first time we met her was so interested in hearing about our parents and where we came from, and we really appreciated that.
Thank you.
You kept it in your heart.
Thank
I
you.
am the youngest of three. I am Shira. Oh, I'm the youngest of three, and I am Shira, and I'm starting because I'm always sick of going last. So, my other name, which you probably don't know, is Mrs. Yehupovitz, which my father named me for years, and I called him Rabbi Shmulevitz. I don't think anybody knew that, but we did it for years and years. I want to thank the entire OZ community for rededicating the sanctuary in honor of our parents. I think I speak for our whole family when I say we are really, really moved by this gesture. Being rabbi and rebbitzin went way beyond a job for both of my parents. OZ to them was a second home, a haven, maybe an occasional headache. It was also an extended family, especially since both of my parents left their families of origin in New York to come to the great unknown of Burlington, Vermont. When I look back at my childhood, I realize OZ was an extended family to me as well. Although most of the old-timers who built this community are no longer here, when I sit in the sanctuary, I feel their presence along with both of my parents. I see my mother staring attentively at her rabbi when he gave his sermons. And if we dared to talk during this time, we were given the evil eye by our mother. Okay, you should know that when we went home to 472 North Street after services, my sisters and I critiqued every one of my father's sermons. You can imagine how much he enjoyed that event. Our mother set the bar of what it meant to be a rebbitzin, mixed with a very modern woman. She was fully involved in all aspects of synagogue life. Just a few of her accomplishments. She served for years as the Hebrew school principal, president of the sisterhood, and we can't remember if she was president of Hadassah or not. So, we don't know. Where am I here? Okay. She and my father were available to congregants day and night. The pulpit was home to clergy, which Mark also discussed, from around the Burlington community. My father's passion for ecumenicism was born out of his experiences with the chaplaincy in World War II. It was deeply, deeply important to him. It is something that I was and always shall be very proud of. When I sit in this sanctuary, if I close my eyes, I can still see both my parents perfectly. I see, for those of you who remember, Reverend Nadelson walking up to the bima. I smell the delicious smell of Sarah Rosenberg's Lakshan Kugel for the Kiddush after services. And I get images of all the original members who I grew up here, who welcomed my parents into this community so many years ago. I know Rabbi and Mimi would wish for OZ to continue to grow and evolve and welcome all who come here. Thank you again. Now to the middle.
Thank you, Shira.
To the middle sister.
Well, as Shira said, it's just so nice of the rededication, and that's lovely. And I want to just say that actually I am a little nervous to speak, so that's the way it is.
It's
but
okay.
I want to tell a couple of stories. When I first met my husband 52 years ago, Greg, I told him about my family, and I said, my father is one of the great men in the world. And he looked and smiled, and he said, that's really, really nice. And I said, no, you don't understand. He's really one of the great men of the world. And he said, well, I think, most daughters probably feel that way, of their fathers. And then I said, yeah, maybe. But, he really is one of the great men of the world. And then as I grew up, I thought, yes, I think many, many daughters feel that way about, their fathers. And so I understand that now. But I just want to say to you people, was one of the great men of the world. Okay. That's my first story. And I just, as Mark, you mentioned, he loved people so much. He did. You could see it. I mean, you just could feel it everywhere you would go. You go into a diner, he loved people, and I love that about him, and I think I learned that about him, from him, and that was great. And he also had and both my mother and my father had such a strong sense of morality, and I hope that's something that, that I learned also, and, what was right and what was wrong, and with the essence of people. And I have a story there to share. So I, as a child, loved Ginny dolls. Does anybody remember Ginny dolls? Probably not. Okay. And I love them. And I also, this is embarrassing, but I kind of like to gamble a little bit. And I don't know why. I don't gamble anymore. But you know, this one friend of mine, she had the best Ginny doll collection. And I would go over there to her house, and we would lay out those Ginny doll clothes, and I would come up with some kind of a game to gamble, to try to, and we would put an ante in with the doll outfit. So like, I could still remember the green velvet one. It's like ecstasy. So anyway, we would do that, and I won all of her clothes. Every one. I remember just thinking, this feels a little funny, but, you know. And I went home, and I told my dad, because I remember he was there, and I said, Dad, you know, and I told him the whole story, and I said, and I won all the clothes. And he said, he listened, and he said, Naomi, I know you are a very good person, and you're going to do the right thing. And so I know you're going to go over there and you're going to return them to her. And I looked at him, I still remember thinking about it. And I looked at him and I said, I'm keeping them. And he said, get your butt over there now. And I don't even think he said, get your tuchus. I think he said, get your buck. And so that was that. And my mom also, she really worked hard on the Ginny doll house. And she made mini little challahs, and we held it. And it was wonderful. It really was, it was wonderful with her. And she did so much in that way. But I look today when I am questioning things or feeling bad or needing some guidance from my parents. And I look and I think about what they would say, and what feels really good is I ask them the question and I know the answer. And I love that. So thank you again.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you. Beautiful.
Well, as the oldest who's been telling everybody else to talk into the microphone, I hope I'm not going to step on too much of what Jeff is going to say. But so we came here when I was very little, and because I have a bad memory, I remember nothing about Ohavi Zedek, which was our original synagogue on Archibald Street. Nothing. I remember going to Hebrew school in the old Hebrew school on Winooski Avenue, but nothing before that. So I just want to go back further. So my father sort of accidentally became the rabbi here, as Jeff will probably tell you. The synagogue needed a rabbi, and they sent the request for a rabbi to the Yeshiva Seminary of New York, which was nothing. And the mailman decided to send it to the Jewish Theological Seminary. And so my father was sent as a candidate. I think they wanted someone who spoke Yiddish. And he was met at the train by two elderly gentlemen who were speaking Yiddish to him. And they told him that they wanted him to give the sermon in Yiddish, which he did. And then someone came up to him and afterwards and said, so how much money do you want? And my father said, you're asking me the wrong question. You should ask me if I want to be here, and I don't. And so he went back to New York. So the second story is the seminary pushed him again. Please go back one more time. There are a lot of young people you didn't get to meet. And so he came back, and the young people were the old-timers who are no longer alive, but the young people had all just returned from Europe or from the war, wherever they had been. And they met him, and they liked him a lot, and they told him they wanted to start an alternative shul. And my father said, well, look, I will be willing to come up for a year if you agree to stay at Ohavi Zedek, and we'll see if we can make the congregation work. And so then when he negotiated with whomever he negotiated, he also said that he was not going to have any sermons in Yiddish. He was only going to speak in English, and he wanted one day to have a synagogue that didn't have separate seating. So that was his dream. And this is his dream completed, and well, not completed, continuing, but this is the accomplishment that he was thrilled about in 1952. Now, I do remember coming, and it was just so exciting. We had a Hebrew school in the building, And this was so new and fabulous, and it was beautiful. And it was a modern synagogue, so it was very different. So living around the corner, my parents spent a lot of time here. My father went to daily minyan, as well as Shabbat and holiday services. The congregation was really central to my parents' life. My memory is that it was so important here that one year the budget, at least one year, the budget was really terrible, as it often is, and my father didn't take a raise. So I think that's pretty unique. So the synagogue was just full with events at the time. Hebrew school was 6 hours a week. There was Young Judea once a week. There was Sisterhood and Men's Club. And Men's Club had breakfast in Minyan every Sunday morning. And the B'nai B'rith, the B'nai B'rith girls served the breakfast. I don't know why, but that's what they did. And they knew that if Rabbi Wall did not get really hot coffee, he was really disgruntled. So that was a really big deal. The other thing is back then, the decorum was very different. It was supposed to be really silent, I think like a church. I think my father was reacting to the fact that in Orthodox synagogues, people talked the whole time and gossiped, so it was very quiet. And if there was a child in here that made a noise, my father stopped, stared at them until they left.
Or adults who were talking to each other, I've heard.
Yes.
Yes.
Or me, who we threw out of during one of his sermons, sitting with Debbie Stein, whose father created these beautiful things. We were laughing during his sermon, and we were asked to leave.
So in World War II, my father, as a chaplain, ministered to many Christians. And in fact, in 1945, he was the chaplain who held Easter services for about several Christian GIs. And that lasted about 5 hours because they were busy talking about how did you understand God and religion and good and evil, considering what they had just seen. So it was very powerful, and it was one of the most meaningful services he ever led. So ecumenicism was hugely important to him. He and other ministers in town established the BEAM, which I can't remember what it stands for, but it's the Burlington Ecumenical, maybe Action Mission, I'm not sure. Action Ministry, yes, probably. There were pulpit swaps, as we still have. And then, as you know, he spent 25 years at least teaching at St. Mike's. Now, as a good Jew in person, he always cared about the underprivileged. It was hugely important to him. So he was like the state rabbi. He used to go to the state hospital once a month, to the Brandon Training School once a month, and to the prison once a month, and hang out, or whatever you want to call it, minister to the Jewish people there. And one of his proudest accomplishments was helping use HUD money to establish Fern Hill, where underprivileged and handicapped people could live. That was very important to him. So that's basically what I have to say. He was, as we all know, an amazing, well, as we all know, there's almost nobody here who knows him anymore, but those of us who did, he was an amazing man. He was warm, he was loving, he really loved people. He would go out of his way to do anything for anybody, and he was on call 24/7. And we all loved him. I don't know if everybody in the congregation did, but we all loved him.
I just have to say one thing that I wasn't going to say, but I have to say this, I'm sorry. Once in my high school years, my wild, rebellious years, I was coming home in a taxi, probably at 2 in the morning, and the taxi pulls up to my parents' house, and he says, "You live here?" He says, "Your father is Rabbi Wall?" And I went, "Yes." He said, "He's the nicest man I have ever met in my life."
Wow. What beautiful, beautiful memories. The synagogue was a different place. There's so much that we have carried along with us from then to now. The rabbinate was a different place. The world was a different place. But because of what your father did, we are here and we are strong. And we are forever grateful. I would like, Mark said we are rededicating this space. You proclaimed it. Now shechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shechianu v'kiyamanu והגיענו לזמן הזה. We thank God for giving us life and for sustaining us to be able to reach this moment, the renewal of the sanctuary rededicated now to Rabbi Max and Mimi Wall. One last song. Manorah hamakom hazeh, when Jacob awoke from a dream and he realized God was present, he said, Manorah hamakom hazeh, how awesome is this place? How awesome is this place? Manorah hamakom hazeh, Manorah hamakom hazeh, Manorah hamakom hazeh, Manorah hamakom hazeh. We are all privileged to be able to be here for this rededication, for a new beginning. I just want to say this last thing. A reporter from WCAX channel, the CBS channel in Burlington, came to see me this week to do a story about Passover. And while he was here, I told him we were rededicating today, just, schmoozing along. And so when they aired the Passover segment, I got one sentence in. But I'm told that there was a follow-up because he was much more fascinated with this. So we'll all get a chance to see it after Shabbos on WCAX. And that is a tribute to how important this moment and how beautiful it is. Thank you, everybody. I know you're probably ready for lunch, but we're ready to finish the service with Musaf. And so I will ask you to stand, if you're able, on page 184.
Yikadal v'yikadash merabah
Amen.
Ve'alma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei V'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayedecho beit Yisrael V'agala v'zman kari v'yimeru Amen. Yehi shemei Rabba mevarach Le'alam olam me'almaya
Yitbarach.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal shemei dekudesha berich
Brichu.
V'hu leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran v'yalma v'yimeru Amen.
Amen. Page 1. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not right. The Musaf for the
185.
festival? 185. Okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu v'Imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomer Chasadim Tovim v'Kodeh HaKol v'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imaot U'Mevi Goel Livnei Bneihem Leman Shemo Be'ahava Melech Ozer Ufoked U'Moshia U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, Ufoked Tzara, Atah Gibor Leolam